Good morning, everybody. I'm Cheuk Chiang, CEO for PhD APAC, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about challenger brands. The topic of challenger brands is one that interests us as both marketers and as consumers. This morning, I did a search on the topic of challenger brands and uncovered over 20 million results just on challenger brands alone. So what is it about challenger brands that interests us as both consumers and as marketers? Well, the challenger brand story itself is a very engaging story. So you think about the many stories amongst the challenger brand archetypes. You have the story of major conflict. You have a story of a hero or a protagonist that we all know very, very well. Or you have a story of the feisty underdog that's fighting their way up against that fat cat that's eating all the profits. Or you have that famous story of the battle against the establishment. So when you think about challenger brands, the challenger brand story really has it all. From a marketer's point of view, challenger brand theory is very exciting for us, really because it helps us not only differentiate our brands, but also very importantly, it helps us create a stance for our brands. It allows our brands to stand for something in the hearts and minds of our consumers. So for all those marketers out there, I just want you to just take a moment, just think about that for a second. So for your brand, what does your brand stand for? Okay, so do you currently have a stance at the moment? And what is that stance? Well, at the moment, our understanding of challenger brands is reasonably limited. So when we think of challenger brands, we often think of either two stories. It's either the David versus Goliath situation or about a brand trying to challenge convention and behaving in a very irreverent manner. But really, challenger brands have actually evolved a lot more as time has progressed, as the market's become much more competitive, as consumers have changed and evolved, as their motivations have changed as well. And we came up with 10 new challenger narratives. Today, what I'm going to do is, given we've got limited time, I'm going to share 5 of those with you. And hopefully you won't be bored. By the end of the 25 minutes, I'm sure you will be. So before I get into it, I think it's first of all important to understand why challenger brand thinking is important in today's age. And we really start with looking at the major generations in history. So you think about how each generation has progressed through time, from post-war, which is the greatest generation, through the silent generation, which was about 1924 onwards, and the baby boomers from from up to 1945, and then baby boomers from about 1965, and then Generation X from right up to about 1983, and then currently Gen Y. In fact, one interesting thing is I never understood why this generation here was called the silent generation, because my grandma used to whinge every single day. You know, hey, why don't you do law study or medicine? It just drive me mad. So anyway, with this major group here, you see an exponential amount of change occurring over time. But really, the greatest amount of change has occurred between Generation X and Generation Y. So in the past 10 years, we've seen more change for Generation Y. Generation Y has seen more change than any other generation in history. So effectively, what we've seen here is a massive generation gap between the middle age, which is me. I know, don't look it. Great skincare regime there. And the youth age. And there's a reason for that. And the reason comes back down to basic motivational theory. And I'm going to take you back to your marketing course that many of you did many years ago. And some of you may be very familiar with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I tried to actually remember some of that earlier on, and this is the only graph that I'm showing today. But some of you will probably remember this. Yeah? So we see at the very, very bottom, these are the physiological needs. You know, need to eat food and breathe. And then there's needs for safety, so having a roof underneath your house. And then things like love, so that's family and sex. And then you have esteem, which is the next layer up. And then you have self-actualization. So when you think about these two generations, you think about what's important for these two generations. So with the middle age, which is my generation, so things that are important are things like having a stable career, a career job, or jumping onto the property ladder, or effectively actually having a family, a stable family environment. Whereas for the Generation Y, for the youth age, these things aren't as important to them, okay, because they've really grown up in an age that's been pretty stable. Okay, there's been no Great Depression over this period of time. I know you can talk about 2 recessions during this period, but really, these guys haven't really starved to death, have they? So for them, this is a generation that's actually been born into the 4th tier, so STEAM. So effectively, what we see here is a shift in focus for these guys, and a shift from really security to things like health and property and employment, to things that are really of a higher need or a higher purpose. So things like personal identity and self-esteem. So the impact for us as marketers is actually quite extreme. So when we think about what's happened throughout history, so we see, say, the silent generation, things like product were really important, and then we move into the baby boomers in Gen Y. It wasn't just about talking about product and product quality and the customer experience. But when we talk about Gen Y, it's not just about product, price and quality and customer experience, but as a brand, you've got to have a purpose. So really, what we're doing here is it's a fundamental shift for us as marketers. So we're seeing a shift from really about challenging someone to really about challenging something. Okay? So if you don't know what you're challenging, you really don't have a strategy. Okay, back to my point earlier on about taking a stance. So we really need to re-engineer our businesses and our brands for this new breed of consumer. In fact, very much so, a new breed of staff that many of us work with on a day-to-day basis. And all companies need to know what their collective purpose is. So what are we challenging? What are you challenging? So it's really time for you to actually rewrite your challenger story. As I mentioned before, we've got 10 challenger archetypes. I'm going to share with you only 5 of those today. Let's start with the first one, which is one that we commonly know, which is the People's Champion. So when you think about the People's Champion, you think of brands like AirAsia, you think about Richard Branson and Virgin, and you think about brands like the South African airline, which is Kulula Air. As far as what the core strategic thought is, this challenger is one that actually consciously sets itself up on the side of the consumer, often fighting against the greedy fat cat. Okay, so you think about Virgin for a minute there. Okay, this is Virgin and Richard Branson. When you think about his archetype, it's very much about the Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Okay, and what are they challenging? They're really challenging the motives and the interests of this greedy market leader. And for consumers, we love that because we think, wow, these guys are on our side. Okay, so Virgin have moved into the airline industry, so rather than paying $1,000 to fly from one destination to another, I'm going to pay $50. Okay, isn't that wonderful? Here's an example that I was talking about earlier on, which is Kulula Air. This is actually one of their planes. This is a livery on their planes. So a classic challenger brand. And we're also very lucky enough to actually have a chat to Heidi Brouwer, who's the marketing manager of Kulula Air. So I'd love for you to have a look at this.
Kulula is a brand for people, and that's what we started as. We said, you know, South Africans, you deserve to fly, and let's make it affordable for you, and let's make it easy for you. I mean, that's our name, Kulula, easily. And let's make it pleasant for you, and let's make it accessible, you know, from an experience point of view, so that not only is it affordable, but when you're on board, you must feel comfortable. You can't do that whilst delivering it from a snobby place, because then there's a disconnect. And so we've always been for the people, for South Africa. We've always fought for things that are important to South Africans. So last year, we had the Soccer World Cup in South Africa. That's not big news for anybody. And what happened was we were being accused, the airlines were all being accused of putting up the prices. So we decided to put out an ad, a print ad in the newspapers to say, actually it is affordable to fly, and here are some prices. But it would have been kind of nuts to ignore the fact that it was a Soccer World Cup. But there were very strict FIFA rules and regulations about what you could and couldn't say or show. But we're Kulula and we push things a little. So we pushed things a little. And we had the odd soccer ball, and we had the odd reference to 2010. And no sooner had it gone out, it was due for its appearance in the dailies, when I got a phone call from our legal department, our internal legal department. And our lawyer said to me, I felt like I was 16 again. She said to me, Heidi, what have you done? And I had this mixture of elation because I knew exactly what it meant. It meant we were in trouble with FIFA, and I was thrilled because that's what Kulula does. We challenge. And I knew we weren't in that much trouble. From a lawyer's point of view, probably we were, but from a brand point of view, it was such an opportunity to be for the people again. Because the people at the time in South Africa were just up to here with being told that we can't use 2010. Gosh, we were in 2010. We couldn't use soccer balls. Gosh, everybody was playing soccer. It was just getting ludicrous. So what did we do? Well, we needed to keep going on about pricing. So our team at our amazing ad agency, King James, came up with an ad then that took out all of the symbolism and wordage that we were supposedly not allowed to use, and replaced it, but in the cheekiest way. And South Africa and the world loved us for it, because only Kulula could do that. We got worldwide recognition. Kulula is known around the world. There's little airline that could. So those are the kinds of things that Kulula does. And if there's a cause outside of air travel or outside of travel that is meaningful for South Africans, Kulula will support it.
So if there's a cause that's outside of airline travel that actually is compelling for these guys, they'll support it. So would you do that as a marketer for your brands? So what's essential for the People's Champion narrative? It's obviously very important for you to start creating some newsworthy communications, constantly being out there, constantly being tactical. It's also very important for you to have honest dialogue as well, because you're standing up for the people, so you need to be honest with them. It's also about providing engaging content, so content that you can respond to with feedback. So you think about it from a media perspective, and think about the sort of channels that you get involved in. So social media, okay, and the importance of not just going out there with a social media campaign, but actually having a team that can work very closely to answer responses on a daily basis. And that's often a mistake that's made. People think I can set up a Facebook page, but they're not there to respond to discussion. It's also about considering employing a spokesperson. You think about, in this case, you've got the wonderful Hardy Brouwer. You think about Virgin with Richard Branson, the face of the brand. The next narrative is one based around what we call the missionary. Brands that you'll be very familiar with here in Asia are brands like Apple Daily. Okay? So telling the truth against a mighty world power like China, or brands like Al Jazeera. And what's important for this particular archetype is that it's fired up with a view about the world that has to share, wearing really a strong sense of purpose on its sleeve. Okay, so we talk about this move to a higher level of esteem. Okay, this is a brand that truly reflects that.
There was a little fellow from Scotland, and I won't pretend to do a Scottish accent because I'm not good at it, but his name's Gary, and he's our innovation team. He's an agency, and so everybody went out the night before to go and find things that we felt were Newcastle-ish moments out there in the world. So he went out and he went to, for some reason, to a very fancy sports bar. They exist because this is New York. There's a fancy version of everything. So he was out in the pub, and in his mind, this was just a pub because he's Scottish, not a fancy sports bar. And televisions everywhere. He went to the bathroom, and then in the bathroom, there's one of these guys that that hands out a little towel and puts soap in your hand, and then gives you a lollipop, and then asks for some money. And he came out of the toilet, and he was telling the story the next day. He was like, I was just flabbergasted. Like, what is this? If this would happen in England, you get beat up. There's a guy handing out towels, in the bathroom. That's just bollocks. And when he said that, there was this we were all sitting in this, in a circle, and there was this realization, like, that's it, bollocks. That's the thing we got to stand up against.
So this is the ad that Newcastle Brown Ale launched with, and it's interesting to see how they used it or used this particular positioning. Some of you may be very familiar with Stella Artois. Lovely, lovely beer. Some of you may think it's truly pretentious, but this is actually what Newcastle did. So talk about a brand behaving in a reverent challenger brand style. So the essentials for this, this narrative is really about setting out the counter stance, but with absolute conviction. It's about identifying the category grip. Okay, so this is what everyone else is doing, so this is what we're going to do. It's really about also taking aim within reach of your competitors, to also highlight the differentiated point of view or your competitor's weakness, in the case of Stella, and about amplifying your difference across the different channels. So that's 5 of the 10 new challenger brand archetypes, new challenger brand narratives. I'm going to leave you with a question, because some of you may be thinking immediately that I want to jump in to creating a new stance for my brand. Okay, but when you think about challenger branding, I want you to ask yourself a question, and that is, what are your competitors doing? Okay? Before you position yourself, think about what your competitors are doing and where are the gaps. So you think about a brand like Virgin. Virgin's moved from being the irreverent maverick to the people's champion to the enlightened Zagger. So there's an opportunity here for us as a brand to really create a 360 personality for our brand and behave in a very different way and constantly re-engineer our brand. So, one more question for you is, as a change agent for your organisation, what type of challenger brand are you then? Okay, so before you jump in with both feet, ask yourself, what type of challenger brand are you? If you don't know, you can check it out on a website that we've created here, which is challengertype.com, or you can pick up a copy of our book and just take a great look into what's previously compelled both consumers and marketers for a long period of time. So from a consumer point of view, a very, very engaging, very interesting story, and from a marketer's point of view, it's about creating a stance. Because ultimately, as Malcolm X said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Thank you.